What if life had no meaning? Not in the poetic sense, but truly no deeper reason, no ultimate goal, just a vast silence stretching across the universe. And yet, we are here, breathing, wanting, searching. Albert Camus called this the absurd, and unlike others who fled from it into faith or despair, he stared it in the face and said, "The absurd is the essential concept in the first truth." This is the world of Albert Camus, the philosopher who dared to say that there may be no meaning, but we must live fully anyway. Albert Camus was born in 1913 in Mondovi, a small town in French Algeria. His life began in the shadow of war. His father, Lucien, was conscripted into World War I and died at the Battle of the Marne when Camus was less than a year old. He would never know him. Raised by his mother, Catherine, a poor, almost completely deaf and illiterate woman, Camus grew up in a working-class district of Algiers, in a home with no books, little conversation, and near silence. Yet from this silence, something profound would grow. Despite the hardships, Camus excelled in school, mentored by a perceptive teacher who recognized his brilliance and pushed him forward. It was through this mentorship, and his own fierce hunger for truth, that he found his way to philosophy. He later studied at the University of Algiers, where he absorbed the Mediterranean sun, the heat, the sand, the sea, elements that would become not just metaphors in his writing, but spiritual companions. I grew up with the sea, and poverty for me was a blessing. It taught me that life can be lived without illusions. Camus was never an armchair thinker. His beliefs were lived, tested, and often scarred by history. During the Nazi occupation of France, he joined the French resistance and became editor-in-chief of the underground newspaper Combat, risking arrest or death to write essays that fought against silence and complicity. The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. He was a novelist, a playwright, an essayist, and yet he always rejected the label of philosopher. I am not a philosopher. I do not believe in systems. What interests me is how to live. For Camus, philosophy was not an academic game. It was a confrontation with life and death. It was about standing in front of the absurd, naked and unarmed, and asking, "What now?" At the age of 44, Camus received the Nobel Prize in Literature, not for producing grand theories, but for illuminating what it means to be human in a senseless world. Yet even in fame, he remained grounded, committed to clarity, simplicity, and moral courage. He once said that the writer's role is not to judge, but to understand. In the midst of hate, I found there was, within me, an invincible love. In the midst of tears, I found there was, within me, an invincible smile. In the midst of chaos, I found there was, within me, an invincible calm. This was the paradox of Camus, forged in silence, faithful to clarity, and alive in revolt. At the heart of Camus' thought lies a singular, piercing realization that we as human beings are creatures of meaning, yet we live in a world that is silent. We look to the universe for answers. We ask, why are we here? What is the purpose of suffering? What happens after death? And the universe answers with, nothing. This silence is not gentle. It's not poetic. It is cold, vast, and impenetrable. Camus gave a name to this confrontation between human longing and cosmic indifference. He called it the absurd. The absurd isn't a philosophical abstraction. It's a daily experience. It's the moment you step out into the brightness of morning and feel a sudden dissonance. When you ask why, and there is no reply. In the myth of Sisyphus, Camus opens with one of the most striking lines in 20th century philosophy. There is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. And judging whether life is or is not worth living amounts to answering the fundamental question of philosophy. This wasn't a cry for help. It was a challenge. Camus argued that the absurd is not a call to despair, but a test. Because once we realize that life offers no ultimate meaning, the temptation is strong to escape. Through religion, through nihilism, through dogma, addiction, fantasy. But Camus said, no, Do not look away. Do not lie to yourself. Face the absurd and live with it. Seeking what is true is not seeking what is desirable. This is the heart of Camus' revolt. To live fully, joyfully, honestly, even when we know there is no cosmic reward. He writes, "The absurd man is he who is aware of this confrontation and lives with it in full clarity." In the myth, Sisyphus is condemned by the gods to roll a massive boulder up a hill, only for it to tumble back down forever. But Camus transforms the myth. He sees not despair but defiance. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Happy, not because the task is easy or hopeful, but because he chooses. He does not cry out for help. He does not ask for a miracle. He turns back down the hill and begins again. This, for Camus, is what it means to be human, to live without appeal, to say yes to life, not because it makes sense, but because it is ours. To live is to keep the absurd alive. In that decision, to persist, to struggle, to create, we become free. Camus didn't just write about philosophy, he lived it. And then he wove it into fiction that burned through the page. For Camus, the novel was not an escape from thought, but its extension into the real, into heat, sand, silence, death, into the absurd world where ideas meet consequences. In The Stranger, L'étranger, we meet Meursault, an ordinary man whose emotional indifference horrifies society more than his crime. He kills a man on a sun-drenched beach, not out of hatred, not for revenge, but seemingly without reason. And when sentenced to die, he does not cry, pray, or beg. He simply accepts. Since we're all going to die, it's obvious that when and how don't matter. What disturbed readers wasn't just the murder, it was Meursault's refusal to pretend. He would not lie to himself or to the court. He would not fake grief nor invent meaning. He chose truth over comfort, and for that he was condemned. The Stranger is not a story about a killer. It's a mirror, a test. How far are we willing to go for the illusion of meaning? But Camus did not stop at individual absurdity. In The Plague, he turns his lens toward society. Set in the Algerian city of Oran, the novel tells the story of a deadly epidemic that seals the city off from the world. The people react as we all do. Some deny it, some collapse, some find God, and others find courage. The central character, Dr. Bernard Rieu, does not believe in divine punishment or heroic sacrifice. He is tired, disillusioned, but he keeps treating patients, quietly, daily, without illusion. When asked why, he replies, "I have no idea what awaits me or what will happen when all this ends. For the moment I know this. There are sick people and they need curing." This is the heart of Camus' ethic. Not hope, not faith, but presence. The only way to fight the plague is with decency. That decency is not a virtue. It's a choice. To act, to help, to resist. Not because we believe in reward or redemption, but because others are suffering, and we are human. Together, The Stranger and The Plague form a moral and philosophical duet. One man refuses to lie about meaning, another refuses to stop acting, even when meaning is gone. This is Camus' paradox. In a world without reason, it is how we live that defines us. For Camus, the absurd was not a license to do nothing. It was not an invitation to give up, to retreat into despair or selfishness. On the contrary, it was a challenge, a call to live more attentively, more deliberately, not to believe more, but to act more carefully. Because when life has no inherent meaning and no divine authority dictates right or wrong, morality does not fade into irrelevance. It becomes more urgent than ever. Camus believed that once the universe falls silent, the weight of moral responsibility returns, not to religion or the state or ideology, but to the individual. It becomes our task not to invent comforting illusions, but to remain fully human in the most inhuman of circumstances. In a world of murder, truth is the only thing one can cling to. This belief set Camus apart from many of his contemporaries. While others turned to radical politics, Embracing ideologies that justified terror and sacrifice in the name of history or revolution, Camus stood his ground. He refused to accept that the end justifies the means, especially when the means involved the death of the innocent. He saw clearly how ideas could become weapons, how language could be twisted to excuse cruelty, how noble causes could mask brutality. To kill oneself or to kill others amounts to the same thing. It is confessing that life is not worth living. This clarity led to one of the most painful intellectual ruptures of the 20th century. His break with Jean-Paul Sartre. They had once been close allies, both young, brilliant, rising voices in post-war France. But when Sartre aligned himself with communism and defended political violence as a tool of revolution, Camus could not follow. For Camus, even the most visionary utopia could not justify the cost of blood spilled in its name. To sacrifice a single life for an idea was to betray the very dignity that rebellion was supposed to protect. I rebel, therefore we exist. This, for Camus, was the foundation of ethical action. Rebellion, properly understood, was not about rage or destruction. It was not a call to burn the world down. It was a state of lucid defiance, the act of standing against injustice while refusing to become unjust yourself. To see the darkness and still choose the light, to know that nothing is certain and still act with courage, restraint, and conscience. The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. This freedom was not about indulgence or detachment or doing whatever one pleases. It was about moral clarity, the kind of freedom that comes from refusing to lie, not to others and not to yourself. Because when the old rules collapse, when institutions fail, and when no one is watching, the only compass that remains is your own conscience. To lie, to conform, to justify, to make excuses is the first betrayal. But to remain true even in silence, even in defeat, that for Camus is where greatness begins. He knew that the hardest thing is not to act, but to act without illusion, to speak honestly in a world built on convenience and performance, and to stay human, painfully, vulnerably human, even when it would be easier not to be. Albert Camus lived in the 20th century, a century of war, genocide, totalitarianism, and collapse. But his questions, his fears, his clarity feel as though they were written for us now. Because we too live in a time where the world often feels meaningless, where truth is drowned in noise, where hope is sold as a product, where distraction has replaced reflection, and comfort is mistaken for peace. And yet, the absurd has not changed. Camus would not urge you to believe in something just because it feels good. He would not wrap despair in soft language. He would not ask you to lie to yourself, even if it made life easier. Instead, he would offer something far more difficult and far more human. He would say, open your eyes, see the absurd, feel it fully, and then live anyway. Not out of duty, not because you must, but because in that clear-eyed decision to go on without illusions, something rare emerges. Dignity. In the depth of winter, I finally learned that within me there lay an invincible summer. To live without meaning is not to live without beauty. To accept absurdity is not to surrender to it. It is to walk forward anyway, to love, to create, to help, to laugh, to fail. Because this, here, now, is what we have. Don't wait for the last judgment. It takes place every day. Camus never gave us hope, but he gave us something quieter, fiercer, a path through the dark walked with open eyes. Albert Camus was not a preacher. He offered no salvation, no promise of transcendence, no system to follow. He didn't pretend to have the answers, only the courage to ask the right questions. In a world full of noise, distraction, and easy illusions, he offered something far more difficult: honesty. Not the cold detachment of cynicism, but a deep, clear gaze into the heart of human existence. He refused to soften the truth and refused to surrender to despair. His work reminds us that meaning is not handed down from above. It is not found in systems or slogans. It is made in the quiet, daily act of choosing to live. That rebellion is not rage or violence, but clarity, a clear refusal to be anything but fully human, even in an inhuman world. And that even when the universe is silent, even when there are no final answers, the human spirit can still say, I will go on.